The gunshot that echoed through the small adobe church in Lordsburg, New Mexico, on that scorching August afternoon in 1882, changed two lives forever, though neither Violet Young nor Grace Elliott could have imagined just how much. The preacher stood at the altar with his rifle pointed at the ceiling, smoke still curling from the barrel, his weathered face set in grim determination as he looked between the two strangers he had just forced to stand before God and each other. Grace's hands trembled as she stared at the tall cowboy beside her, this man she had never met until an hour ago when their stagecoach had been robbed just outside town. Violet Young had been riding his horse alongside the coach, heading into Lordsburg for supplies, when masked bandits had descended on them both. In the chaos that followed, Grace had been thrown from the coach, and Violet had pulled her up onto his horse to escape the gunfire. They had ridden hard for town, her arms wrapped around his waist, her face pressed against his back, feeling every powerful movement of his body as he urged his stallion forward. But when they burst into Lordsburg covered in dust and breathing hard, the local preacher, Josiah Blackwell, had taken one look at them, saw Grace's torn dress and disheveled hair, her arms still clinging to the cowboy, and had made an assumption that no amount of protesting could shake. In 1882, New Mexico Territory, a woman's reputation was everything, and Preacher Blackwell had seen too many young women ruined by circumstances beyond their control. He had grabbed his rifle from behind the bar where he had been taking his afternoon whiskey and marched them both to his church at Gunpoint. "I will not have sin in my town," he had declared, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. "You will marry this girl, young man, and you will do it now, or I will see you hanged for compromising her virtue." Nothing they said made any difference. Grace had pleaded that nothing improper had happened, that Violet had saved her life. Violet had tried to explain about the bandits, about the stagecoach robbery. But the preacher was a widower who had lost his own daughter to scandal years before, and he would not be moved. The few townspeople who had gathered in the church looked on with a mixture of sympathy and stern approval. This was how things were done in the territories. A woman's honor had to be protected, even if it meant forcing two strangers into matrimony. And so Grace found herself speaking vows she never intended to speak, to a man whose face she could barely see through her tears of humiliation and anger. Violet's voice was steady as he repeated the words, but she could hear the tension in it, the barely controlled fury at being trapped in this impossible situation. When Preacher Blackwell finally lowered his rifle and declared them man and wife, Grace wanted to run. She wanted to disappear into the desert and never look back. Instead, she stood frozen as Violet turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers for the first time since they had been forced to the altar. He was handsome, she realized distantly, with strong features tanned by years under the sun, dark hair that needed cutting, and a jaw set with stubborn determination. He was perhaps 25 or 26 years old, broad-shouldered and lean in the way of men who made their living working cattle. "I am sorry," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Grace could not find words to respond. She simply turned and walked out of the church, her new husband following several paces behind. The boarding house where Grace had planned to stay, while looking for work as a schoolteacher, now seemed like a distant dream. Mrs. Henderson, the proprietress, stood on the porch with her arms crossed, her expression making it clear that a married woman could not stay in her establishment without her husband. Grace felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger as Violet stepped up beside her. "I have a small ranch about 5 miles outside town," he said, not quite looking at her. "It is not much, Just a cabin and some land I have been working for the past 3 years. You are welcome to stay there. I will sleep in the barn." "I do not need your charity," Grace said, her voice sharper than she intended. "This entire situation is absurd. We can have the marriage annulled. We can go to the territorial judge and explain what happened." Violet was quiet for a moment, then shook his head slowly. "The nearest judge is in Santa Fe, over 200 miles from here. And even if we made the journey, you think he would believe us? You are already marked as my wife in the church records. Your reputation would be destroyed whether we stay married or not." The truth of his words hit Grace like a physical blow. She had come to New Mexico territory with such hopes, ready to start fresh after losing her parents to fever back in St. Louis. She was 22 years old, educated, and determined to make her own way in the world. Now she was trapped in a marriage she never wanted, bound to a stranger by the zealous intervention of a grief-stricken preacher. "Fine," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "Take me to your ranch. But understand this, Mr. Young. I may be your wife in the eyes of the law, but that is all I will ever be." Violet's jaw tightened, but he simply nodded and went to retrieve his horse and arrange for a wagon to carry Grace's belongings. She watched him walk away, his movements efficient and controlled, and felt a confusing mixture of emotions. Anger at the situation, frustration at her helplessness. And underneath it all, a tiny flicker of something else she refused to acknowledge, a memory of how safe she had felt with her arms around him as they rode away from danger. The ride to Violet's ranch was conducted in near silence. Grace sat stiffly on the wagon seat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush under an endless sky. The heat was oppressive, and Grace could feel sweat trickling down her back, but she refused to show any discomfort. Violet drove the wagon with practiced ease, his hands steady on the reins. Several times he seemed about to speak, but each time he stopped himself, and the silence stretched on. Grace was grateful for it. She did not know what she would say to him anyway. None of this was his fault, she knew that rationally, but her heart still burned with resentment at the circumstances that had brought them here. When they finally reached the ranch, Grace felt her spirits sink even further. Violet had not been exaggerating when he said it was not much. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms from what she could see, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. The barn was larger and in better repair, suggesting where Violet's priorities had been. There was a small corral with several horses, a chicken coop, and various other outbuildings in various states of completion. Everything spoke of a man working alone, building something slowly and carefully with his own 2 hands. "I know it is not what you are used to," Violet said as he helped her down from the wagon, his hands careful not to linger on her waist. "But it is mine. I bought this land with money. I saved working as a ranch hand for 7 years. Every board in that cabin I cut and placed myself." Despite herself, Grace felt a flicker of respect. She knew how hard life was in the territories, how much work it took to carve out even a small piece of civilization from the wilderness. "It is yours," she said quietly. "I am just an unwanted guest." Violet was silent for a moment, then began unloading her trunk from the wagon. "You are my wife," he said finally, his voice neutral. "Like it or not, this is your home now too. I will not have you feeling like a guest in your own house." Grace wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with her. The robbery, the forced marriage, the long ride in the heat had all taken their toll. She followed Violet into the cabin, and despite her determination to remain unimpressed, she found herself looking around with reluctant curiosity. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. It was sparse but clean, with handmade furniture that showed careful craftsmanship. There was a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, some shelves with supplies, and a rocking chair by the window. Through an open doorway, she could see a bedroom with a simple bed covered in a quilt that looked like it had seen better days. "You take the bedroom," Violet said, setting her trunk down. "I meant what I said about staying in the barn. There is a cot out there that will do me fine." "For how long?" Grace asked, suddenly weary beyond measure. "Are we to live like this forever, strangers sharing a property but not a life?" Violet turned to face her fully for the first time since they had left town. His dark eyes were intense, and Grace found herself unable to look away. "I do not know," he admitted. "I never planned on having a wife, least of all one forced on me by a preacher with a rifle, but we are in this situation now and we have to make the best of it. I will not force myself on you, Mrs. Young. You have my word on that. But I also will not pretend this marriage does not exist. Give me a year." "A year," Grace repeated, confused. "A year for what?" "A year to prove that I can be the kind of man who deserves you," Violet said simply. "A year to show you that maybe this situation, as terrible as it started, does not have to be the worst thing that ever happened to either of us. If at the end of that year you still want to leave, I will take you to Santa Fe myself, and we will seek an annulment or whatever legal remedy we can find. But give me that much. Give me a chance to be a real husband to you." Grace stared at him, speechless. She had expected anger or resentment to match her own. She had expected him to make demands or to sulk about his trapped circumstances. She had not expected this quiet determination, this willingness to shoulder the burden and make something of their impossible situation. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you want to try? We do not know each other. We never chose each other. Why not just accept that this is a disaster and live our separate lives as much as possible?" Violet was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "Because when I pulled you up onto my horse today, and you held onto me like I was the only solid thing in the world, I felt something I have not felt in a very long time," he said softly. "I felt needed. I felt like maybe I could be the kind of man who protects someone, who matters to someone. And when I saw you standing in that church with tears on your face, looking so scared and angry and beautiful, I thought that maybe fate had given me something I did not know I wanted. A chance at something more than just surviving alone on this ranch." Grace felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "You do not know me," she whispered. "I could be terrible. I could be selfish and mean and impossible to live with." "Could be," Violet agreed with the ghost of a smile. "But I doubt it. A woman who would stand up to a preacher with a rifle and defend a stranger's honor is not selfish. A woman with enough courage to come to the territories alone to make her own way is not weak. I think you are exactly the kind of person worth spending a year proving myself to." Grace Elliott. Grace Young, I mean. Hearing her new name on his lips sent a strange shiver through Grace. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "I need time," she said. "I need to think about all of this." "Take all the time you need," Violet said gently. "I will be outside tending to the animals if you need anything. There is water in the bucket by the door, and I will bring in wood for the stove before I go to the barn tonight. Make yourself at home, Grace, please." He left then, closing the door quietly behind him, and Grace was alone in the cabin of her stranger husband. She sank down onto one of the wooden chairs and finally let the tears come, crying for her lost freedom, her ruined plans, and the terrifying uncertainty of her future. But underneath the grief and anger, there was something else, a tiny seed of possibility that she was not quite ready to acknowledge. Violet Young had kind eyes, and he had saved her life, and he had promised to prove himself worthy of her. In the harsh world of 1882 New Mexico territory, where women had few rights and fewer choices, perhaps that was something worth considering. The days that followed settled into an uneasy routine. Grace woke each morning to find that Violet had already been up for hours, tending to the horses and cattle, repairing fences, and doing the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. He would come to the cabin for breakfast, eating quickly and politely whatever Grace managed to prepare, thanking her with genuine appreciation even when her cooking was mediocre at best. Then he would disappear again, working until the sun set and beyond. Grace spent her days trying to create order in the cabin, unpacking her few belongings and attempting to make the space feel less foreign. She had been raised in a comfortable home in St. Louis, with servants and fine things, but her parents' deaths had left her nearly penniless. She had enough education to work as a teacher, and she had thought that would be her path. Now she found herself playing house with a stranger, learning to cook on a wood stove, hauling water from the well, and fighting a losing battle against the dust that seemed to permeate everything in this desert country. Violet was unfailingly polite and respectful, but there was a distance between them that felt impossible to bridge. He slept in the barn as promised, and though Grace told herself she was relieved, she also found herself lying awake at night, acutely aware of how alone she was in the cabin, how vulnerable she would be if anyone with bad intentions came by. 2 weeks after their forced wedding, Grace decided to try teaching Violet to read. She had noticed that while he could sign his name and seemed to recognize some words, he struggled with anything more complex. One evening when he came in for supper, she had set out one of her books on the table. "I thought perhaps we could read together in the evenings," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "If you are interested." Violet had looked at the book, then at her, his expression unreadable. "I never had much schooling," he admitted. "My father needed me working as soon as I was big enough to hold a rope. I can manage numbers well enough for the ranch accounts, but reading never came easy to me." "I could teach you," Grace offered. "I was planning to be a school teacher after all. And it would give us something to do besides sit in silence." Something shifted in Violet's face, a flicker of hope quickly suppressed. "I would like that," he said quietly, "if you are truly willing." And so they began spending their evenings at the table together. Grace patiently helping Violet work through simple texts, watching as he struggled and persevered, his brow furrowed in concentration. She discovered that he was intelligent and quick to learn once he understood a concept, but years of neglect had left gaps in his education. He was hungry for knowledge in a way that touched something in Grace's heart, making her remember why she had wanted to teach in the first place. During these evening lessons, Grace began to learn more about the man she had married. Violet had been born in Texas, the youngest son of a struggling rancher who had drunk away what little money the family had. His mother had died when he was 10, and his father had become increasingly bitter and violent. As soon as Violet was old enough, he had left, working his way north through New Mexico territory, taking any job he could find. He had saved every penny for 7 years, living on almost nothing, until he had enough to buy this small parcel of land and start building his dream of having a ranch of his own. "I always thought I would do it alone," he admitted one night as they sat together by lamplight. "I told myself I did not need anyone else, that I was better off on my own. My father's marriage made him miserable, and I swore I would never end up like him. But then you came into my life in the strangest way possible, and I started thinking that maybe I had been wrong. Maybe being alone was not the victory I thought it was." Grace did not know how to respond to that. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, could see the vulnerability in his eyes. This man, who seemed so strong and self-sufficient, was admitting to loneliness, to doubt, to hope. It made her own walls feel harder to maintain. "I had different dreams," she said softly. "I wanted to teach children, to make a difference in their lives the way my own teacher made a difference in mine. I wanted independence, the ability to support myself and make my own choices. This marriage, even though I understand why it happened, feels like all those dreams being taken away." Violet nodded slowly. "I know, and I am sorry for that, but maybe we could find new dreams together. You could still teach if you wanted to. Lordsburg needs a school teacher. The children there have been without one for nearly a year. You could apply for the position." Grace looked at him in surprise. "You would allow that?" "Allow?" Violet's eyebrows rose. "Grace, you are not my prisoner. If teaching is what you want to do, then you should do it. I would never stop you from following your passion. I will admit, I would miss our evening lessons together. But your happiness matters more than my convenience." Something cracked in Grace's carefully maintained distance. This man who barely knew her was willing to support her dreams, to encourage her to be more than just a ranch wife. It was more than she had dared to hope for, and it confused her, made her feel off balance in a way she was not sure how to handle. The next morning, Grace rode into Lordsburg with Violet, sitting beside him on the wagon seat. The town was small but growing, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, the church where they had been married, and various other establishments. Violet introduced her to several people, always referring to her as his wife with a quiet pride that made Grace's cheeks warm. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house looked at Grace with new respect when she learned about Grace's teaching credentials. "We desperately need a school teacher," she said. "The town council has been trying to recruit someone for months, but few people want to come this far into the territories. If you are interested, I will set up a meeting with Mayor Harrison immediately." By the end of the day, Grace had been offered the position as Lordsburg's schoolteacher, starting the following Monday. The salary was modest but fair, and the schoolhouse, though small and in need of some repair, was adequate for the 20 or so children in town and the surrounding ranches. Grace accepted the position with a joy she had not felt since before her parents died, and when she turned to share the news with Violet, she found him watching her with such genuine happiness for her success that she impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing me here, for encouraging me to try." Violet's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "You earned this yourself, Grace. I just drove the wagon." But they both knew it was more than that. He could have discouraged her, could have insisted she stay at the ranch and tend to domestic duties. Instead, he had supported her, and that support meant everything. As the weeks passed and summer faded into early autumn, Grace threw herself into teaching. Her students ranged from 6-year-old twins learning their letters to a 17-year-old ranch hand trying to improve his reading enough to keep better accounts for his employer. She loved every challenging, exhausting moment of it. And each evening, she would return to the ranch to find Violet had prepared simple meals for them both, had made sure the cabin was warm and welcoming, had done everything he could to make her life easier. Their evening lessons continued, but now they were more collaborative. Violet's reading had improved dramatically, and they would sit together discussing books from Grace's small collection, debating ideas and sharing thoughts. Grace discovered that Violet had a philosophical bent, a way of thinking deeply about moral questions and the nature of justice that fascinated her. He was not educated in a formal sense, but he was thoughtful and curious, with a wisdom born of hard experience. One evening in late October, as they sat together reading a collection of Emerson's essays. A sudden thunderstorm rolled in from the west. Rain hammered against the roof and lightning split the sky, illuminating the cabin in brief, brilliant flashes. Grace had always been afraid of storms, a fear dating back to a childhood experience when lightning had struck a tree near her home, and she found herself tensing with each crack of thunder. Violet noticed immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked, setting down his book. "I am fine," Grace said, but her voice shook, betraying her. Another lightning strike, close enough that they could smell the ozone, made Grace jump. Without thinking, Violet moved his chair closer to hers, not quite touching her but near enough that she could feel his presence, solid and reassuring. "I am here," he said quietly. "You are safe, Grace. The cabin has weathered worse storms than this." Grace wanted to maintain her independence, to prove she did not need comforting. But another roll of thunder broke her resolve, and she found herself leaning toward Violet, accepting the arm he carefully placed around her shoulders. She could feel the warmth of him through his shirt, could hear the steady beat of his heart, and slowly her fear began to recede. They sat like that until the storm passed, not speaking, just sharing the quiet comfort of human contact. When the rain finally stopped and Grace realized how close they were, she pulled away, flustered and confused by how right it had felt to be in his arms. "I should go to bed," she said, standing quickly. "Thank you for staying with me." Violet stood as well, his expression gentle. "Always, Grace. Whenever you need me, I am here." He left for the barn then, and Grace lay awake in her bed for hours, thinking about what it meant that she had wanted to stay in his arms, that she had felt disappointed when she pulled away. Violet Young was becoming more than just the stranger she had been forced to marry. He was becoming someone she looked forward to seeing, someone whose opinion mattered to her, someone who made her laugh with his dry observations about ranch life, and whose rare smiles felt like a gift. It terrified her, this slow softening of her heart. She had been so determined to maintain her distance, to prove that no forced marriage could make her care for someone she had not chosen. But Violet was making it impossible to keep those walls intact. He was patient and kind and respectful of her boundaries, but he was also persistent in the best way, showing up every day with steady devotion, proving through his actions that he meant every word of his promise to spend a year showing her he deserved her. As winter approached, the ranch work became more demanding. Violet spent long days preparing for the cold months ahead, repairing buildings, stocking supplies, and moving his small herd of cattle to better grazing land. Grace continued teaching, but she also found herself taking on more responsibilities at the ranch, not because Violet asked or expected it, but because she wanted to contribute, to be a true partner rather than just a tenant in his home. She learned to care for the chickens, gathering eggs each morning and feeding them their grain. She learned to milk the 2 cows Violet kept for dairy, her hands growing strong and capable from the daily work. She improved her cooking, trading recipes with other ranch wives and experimenting, until she could make bread that did not turn out like stones and stew that actually tasted good. Violet noticed every effort, thanking her genuinely, but never making a fuss that would embarrass her. He began sharing more of the ranch decisions with her, asking her opinion on which supplies to purchase in town, whether they should try to expand the herd in the spring, how to allocate their modest funds. Grace realized that he was not just being polite. He truly valued her input, saw her as an equal partner even though she knew almost nothing about ranching. In early December, a traveling preacher came through Lordsburg, not Josiah Blackwell who had married them but a Methodist circuit rider making his rounds. Grace and Violet attended the Sunday service together, sitting side by side in the small church. The sermon was about forgiveness and second chances, about how God could bring good even from difficult circumstances. Afterward, as they drove home through the crisp winter air, Grace found herself speaking thoughts she had not fully formed until that moment. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The way we were married? Do you wish Preacher Blackwell had just let us go our separate ways?" Violet was quiet for a long time, his eyes on the road ahead. "At first, yes," he admitted. "I was angry at being trapped, at having my choices taken away. But now, no, Grace, I do not regret it. These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life. I know that may not mean much, given that my life has been mostly hard work and loneliness, but it is the truth. You have made this ranch feel like a home instead of just a place where I sleep between working." Grace felt her heart clench at his words. "I do not regret it either," she said softly. "Not anymore. You have been kinder to me than you had any obligation to be. You have supported my teaching, you have never made demands, you have been patient and respectful and good. I came here so angry at fate, at that preacher, at you even though you did nothing wrong, but I am not angry anymore. I am grateful." Violet turned to look at her then, his dark eyes searching her face. "Grateful? Grateful that if I had to be forced to marry someone, it was you," Grace clarified, her cheeks warming. "Grateful that you are a good man, Violet Young, better than I expected or probably deserved." They arrived back at the ranch then, and Violet helped Grace down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "You deserve the world, Grace," he said quietly, "and I intend to spend every day trying to give it to you." That night, Grace lay in bed thinking about the year Violet had asked for, the year he wanted to prove himself to her. 6 months had already passed, and she could no longer imagine her life without him in it. He had become essential to her daily happiness, and the thought of seeking an annulment, of leaving him, felt impossible now. But admitting that to herself was one thing. Admitting it to him was another. Grace was still afraid, still uncertain whether what she felt was truly love or just gratitude and growing affection. She had always imagined that when she fell in love, it would be dramatic and overwhelming, not this slow warming, this gradual intertwining of two lives. She wanted to be sure before she said anything to Violet, sure that what she felt was real and lasting. Christmas came, and with it a rare snowstorm that blanketed the ranch in white. Grace and Violet spent Christmas Eve together in the cabin, reading stories by the fire and sharing a special meal that Grace had prepared. She had even managed to make a pie with dried apples, and Violet's delight at the treat made her laugh with pure joy. "I have something for you," Violet said when they had finished eating. He disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a carefully wrapped package. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have something special." Grace unwrapped the package with trembling fingers and gasped when she saw what was inside. It was a shawl hand-woven in deep blue wool, soft and warm and more beautiful than anything she had owned in years. "Violet, this is too much. This must have cost you a small fortune." "You are worth a small fortune," Violet said simply, "and many times more than that. I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that would keep you warm when you drive to town for teaching, something that would remind you that someone cares about you." Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. She stood and impulsively wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, then turned to face Violet. "I have something for you too," she said. She retrieved a package from where she had hidden it behind the stack of firewood and handed it to him shyly. Violet opened it to find a book, a beautiful leather-bound volume of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. "I know you have been enjoying poetry," Grace explained, "and I thought you might like to have a book of your own, something you chose yourself rather than just reading from my collection." Violet held the book as if it were made of gold, his expression awed. "Grace, I cannot remember the last time someone gave me a gift. Thank you. I will treasure this always." The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. Grace found herself stepping closer to Violet, drawn by something she could no longer deny or ignore. "Violet," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, but before she could continue, there was a loud knock at the door, shattering the moment. Violet frowned and went to answer it, revealing one of their neighbors, Tom Richter, covered in snow and breathing hard. "Sorry to interrupt your Christmas," Tom said quickly, "but my wife is in labor and something is wrong. The midwife is snowed in on the other side of the creek, cannot get across." "Grace, I know you are not a midwife, but you are educated and my Sarah is asking for you. Please, will you come?" Grace did not hesitate. "Of course. Let me get my cloak." She turned to Violet. "I may be gone all night. Do not wait up for me." "I am coming with you," Violet said firmly. "You are not riding out in this storm alone, and Tom may need help as well." The ride to the Richter ranch was treacherous, the snow still falling heavily and the wind biting through their warmest clothes. But they made it safely, and Grace spent the next 8 hours helping Sarah through a difficult labor while Violet kept Tom calm and the fire going. Just before dawn, a healthy baby girl was born, her cries strong and indignant in the cold morning air. Sarah wept with relief and gratitude, clutching Grace's hand. "Thank you. I do not know what I would have done without you." "You would have been fine," Grace assured her, though privately she was not so sure. The baby had been turned wrong, and Grace had only managed to help because she remembered detailed descriptions from a medical text her father had owned. "You are strong, Sarah. You did all the hard work." As Grace and Violet rode back to their ranch in the pale winter dawn, Grace felt utterly exhausted but also strangely exhilarated. She had helped bring a life into the world. She had been needed and had risen to the challenge. And through it all, Violet had been there, steady and supportive, doing whatever was required without complaint. "You were amazing tonight," Violet said as they approached their cabin. "You stayed so calm, even when I know you must have been frightened." "I was terrified," Grace admitted. "But I kept thinking that Sarah needed me to be strong, so I had to be." She paused, then added, "Thank you for coming with me. I felt braver knowing you were there." They reached the cabin and Violet helped Grace down from the wagon, catching her when her exhausted legs nearly gave out. For a moment they stood close together in the snowy yard, his arms around her waist, her hands on his shoulders. Grace looked up into his face, seeing the tenderness in his eyes, and felt her heart make a decision her mind was still processing. "Violet," she said softly, "I think I am falling in love with you." His eyes widened in shock. "Grace, you are exhausted. You have been up all night. You do not have to say things you might regret later just because I helped you with the Richters." "I am not saying it because of tonight," Grace insisted. "I am saying it because it is true. I have been falling in love with you for months now, so slowly I did not even realize it was happening. But tonight made me see clearly what has been true for a while. I love how patient you are with me. I love how you supported my teaching even though it meant less help on the ranch. I love the way you talk about books like they are magical things, and the way you thank me for every meal, even when it is just beans and cornbread. I love your quiet strength and your gentle heart, and the way you have never once made me feel like I owe you anything even though I have been living in your house for 6 months. Violet stared at her, his expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Do you mean that? Truly?" "Because, Grace, I have been in love with you since about 2 weeks after we were married, when I came in from working and found you singing while you swept the floor. You looked so beautiful and so perfectly at home, and I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life making you happy. But I did not dare hope you could ever feel the same way about me. You love me, Grace whispered, her heart soaring. Truly, truly, Violet confirmed, with everything I am. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Young, even if it took a crazy preacher with a rifle to bring you into my life. Grace started to laugh, the sound bright and joyful in the quiet, snowy morning. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she stood on her toes and kissed him. It was her first kiss ever, unpracticed and probably clumsy, but Violet responded with such tender care that it felt perfect anyway. His arms tightened around her, pulling her close, and Grace felt warmth spread through her entire body despite the cold. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Violet touched his forehead to hers. "Does this mean you want to be married to me for real?" he asked. "Not just because a preacher forced us, but because you choose it." "Yes," Grace said without hesitation. "I choose you, Violet Young. I choose this life we are building together. I do not need the rest of the year you promised. You have already proven yourself to me 100 times over." "Then come inside with me," Violet said softly. "Not to separate rooms, but together. Let me show you how much I love you, how much you mean to me." Grace felt nervous excitement flutter in her stomach, but she nodded. This was what she wanted, to be truly married to this good man who had won her heart through patience and devotion. They went into the cabin together, and Violet led her to the bedroom, treating her with such reverence and care that Grace felt cherished beyond measure. They spent that snowy Christmas morning discovering each other, learning the language of touch and intimacy, becoming truly husband and wife in every sense. Afterward, lying in Violet's arms as snow continued to fall outside the window, Grace felt a peace and happiness she had never known before. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she murmured against his chest. Violet pressed a kiss to her hair. "Neither did I, but we are and we will be for the rest of our lives. I promise you that, Grace." The winter months that followed were a honeymoon period, though they never left the ranch for a formal trip. Grace continued teaching in Lordsburg, and Violet continued running the ranch, but now they faced everything as true partners, united in heart and purpose. They spent their evenings reading together, but now they sat close on the small sofa Violet built, Grace often leaning against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. They talked about their dreams and plans for the future, about expanding the ranch and the possibility of children and growing old together. In February, Grace missed her monthly courses and began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited 2 more weeks to be sure, then told Violet one evening over dinner. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then set her down gently and knelt before her, placing his hands reverently on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." He looked up at her with wonder. "I promise I will be the best father I can be, Grace. I will never be like my father was. Our child will grow up knowing love and security and encouragement." "I know," Grace said, running her fingers through his hair. "You will be a wonderful father, Violet. I have no doubts about that at all." As Grace's pregnancy progressed, Violet became almost comically overprotective, insisting she stop teaching when she entered her 6th month, hovering anxiously whenever she so much as lifted a water bucket. Grace found his concern endearing rather than suffocating, touched by how much he cared for both her and their unborn child. In early September of 1883, just over a year after their forced wedding, Grace went into labor. Violet rode frantically to town to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Chen, an elderly Chinese woman who had helped deliver half the babies in the territory. She arrived calm and competent, shooing Violet out of the bedroom with firm instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. The labor was long and difficult, and Violet spent hours pacing the main room, praying and worrying in equal measure. He had never felt so helpless in his life, listening to Grace's pains from beyond the closed door, unable to do anything to ease her suffering. He thought about how she had helped Sarah Richter through her labor, how brave and strong Grace had been, and he prayed that she would have that same strength now for herself. Finally, just as the sun was setting, Violet heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's first cry, strong and healthy and indignant at being thrust into existence. Moments later, Mrs. Chen opened the door, her weathered face creased in a smile. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy with strong lungs. Your wife did excellently. She is tired but well. Come and meet your child." Violet entered the bedroom on shaking legs and stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sight before him. Grace lay in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion but glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, and as Violet approached, he caught his first glimpse of his son's red, wrinkled face. "He is perfect," Grace said softly, looking up at Violet with tears in her eyes. "Come and hold him." Violet sat carefully on the edge of the bed and took the baby into his arms with the utmost care, terrified of dropping or hurting this fragile new life. But as soon as he held his son, something clicked into place in his heart. This was his child, his family, proof that he was not alone in the world anymore. He had Grace, and now he had this perfect little boy, and his life felt complete in a way he had never imagined possible. "What shall we name him?" Grace asked. Violet looked down at his son, then at his wife, and felt his heart overflow with love. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Vincent Young, if that is all right with you." "It is perfect," Grace agreed. "Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the world." The first months of Daniel's life were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Grace recovered from the birth and threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. Violet helped in every way he could, walking Daniel when he cried at night so Grace could sleep, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with endless fascination. When spring came and Grace announced she wanted to return to teaching part-time, Violet supported the decision immediately. They arranged for Mrs. Chen to watch Daniel 3 days a week, and Grace returned to the schoolhouse with renewed energy. She missed her students and the intellectual stimulation of teaching, and having that outlet made her a better mother and wife when she was home. The years passed quickly, marked by seasons and small joys. Daniel learned to walk and talk, becoming a bright, curious boy who followed his father around the ranch, asking endless questions about the animals and the land. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily, Violet's hard work and careful management paying off in increased herd sizes and improved facilities. In 1886, Grace gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Abigail Rose. She had Grace's auburn hair and Violet's dark eyes, and she was a calmer baby than Daniel had been, content to watch the world with solemn interest. Daniel adored his little sister, treating her with a gentleness that made both Grace and Violet's hearts melt. One evening in the autumn of 1887, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Daniel played in the yard and Grace nursed baby Abigail, Grace turned to Violet with a reflective expression. "You remember 5 years ago, when Preacher Blackwell forced us to marry at gunpoint?" she asked. Violet smiled wryly. "I am not likely to forget. It was the most terrifying and confusing day of my life. Why do you ask?" "Because I have been thinking about how much has changed since then," Grace said. How we went from being hostile strangers to this. She gestured at the scene before them, at their home and their children and the life they had built together. I was so angry that day. I felt like my life was being stolen from me. But now I look at what we have, and I cannot imagine any other path bringing me to this happiness. Violet took her free hand, threading his fingers through hers. I told you I would spend a year proving I deserved you. I think it took closer to 6 months before you started to soften toward me. 6 months before I admitted I was softening, Grace corrected with a laugh. But yes, you were right that it would not take the full year. You won me over with your patience and your kindness and your terrible jokes and your good heart. You proved yourself to me 100 times over, Violet Young. And yet I am still trying to prove myself every day, Violet said. Because you deserve nothing less than my best effort always. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling utterly content. We have been blessed, haven't we? Despite how it started, despite all the challenges, we have been so very blessed. We have, Violet agreed. And I am grateful every single day. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Daniel ran up to show them a particularly interesting rock he had found, and Violet lifted him onto his lap to examine it with appropriate seriousness. Abigail finished nursing, and Grace held her against her shoulder, patting her back gently. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable in most ways, but Grace recognized it for what it was: perfect happiness. More years passed, bringing new children and new challenges. In 1889, Grace gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Sarah, who kept the household in chaos with their boundless energy and mischievous schemes. In 1891, another son arrived, Thomas, who was serious and thoughtful even as a baby. The ranch continued to grow, and Violet hired several ranch hands to help with the work. He treated them fairly and paid them well, and he gained a reputation as a good man to work for. Grace continued teaching, though now she focused more on the ranch and her children, only teaching occasionally when the regular teacher needed help. Throughout everything, Grace and Violet's love for each other only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration and miscommunication. But they had learned to talk through problems, to give each other grace, to remember that they were on the same team facing the world together. On their 10th wedding anniversary in August of 1892, Violet surprised Grace with a trip to Santa Fe. They left the children with Mrs. Chen and another ranch family and traveled to the territorial capital for a week. It was the first time they had been truly alone together since before Daniel was born, and it felt like a second honeymoon. Walking through the plaza in Santa Fe one evening, their hands linked together, Grace thought about their conversation about seeking an annulment 10 years before. If they had made that trip then, if they had ended their forced marriage, she would have missed out on this life, this love, these children. The thought was unbearable. "What are you thinking about?" Violet asked, noticing her pensive expression. "About how grateful I am that I chose to give you that year," Grace said. "About how you used those months to show me what an extraordinary man you are. About how even though I thought I was giving something up by staying married to you, I was actually gaining everything that matters." Violet stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "You have never told me this, but I have always wondered. If Preacher Blackwell had not forced us to marry that day, if you had made it to the boarding house and I had gone on to my ranch, do you think we would have met again? Do you think we could have found each other on our own?" Grace considered the question seriously. "I do not know," she admitted. "We were both so determined to be independent, to make our own way. You were never going to look for a wife, and I was focused on teaching. We might have passed each other in town a dozen times and never really connected. Or perhaps we would have met at some social function and felt a spark. There is no way to know. She smiled up at him. But I like to think that somehow, some way we would have found each other. Because what we have feels like destiny, Violet. Like we were always meant to be together, and fate just used an unusual method to bring us to that truth. I love you, Grace Young, Violet said, pulling her close. I loved you when you were angry and defensive and determined not to let me in. I loved you when you started to soften, when you first smiled at me genuinely. I loved you on that snowy Christmas morning when you told me you were falling for me. And I love you now, after 10 years of marriage and 5 children and a lifetime of memories. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace replied, even if it took a preacher with a rifle to make me see it. They both laughed at that, then kissed in the fading light of the New Mexico evening. Just 2 people among many in the plaza, but to each other, they were everything. When they returned to the ranch, their children greeted them with shrieks of joy. Daniel, now 9 years old, and proudly telling them how he had helped with the ranch work while they were gone. Abigail showing off her careful stitching on a sampler. The twins babbling excitedly about their adventures, and Thomas todding forward with outstretched arms demanding to be picked up. Grace looked at Violet over the chaos of their children, and he looked back at her, and they shared a moment of perfect understanding. This was their life, the one they had built together from the most unlikely beginning, and it was good. As the years continued to pass, the young ranch became known throughout the territory as one of the most successful small operations in the region. Violet's careful stewardship of the land and his fair treatment of workers earned him respect from neighboring ranchers, and several sought his advice on managing their own spreads. Grace's reputation as an educator also grew, and she began training other teachers, helping to establish schools throughout the area. Their children grew into fine young people. Daniel inherited his father's love of the land and his mother's sharp mind, becoming an invaluable help on the ranch while also pursuing education. Abigail proved to have a gift for healing, learning everything she could from Mrs. Chen, and eventually becoming a midwife herself, helping bring new life into the world just as Grace had done for the Richter family so many years before. The twins, Emma and Sarah, were creative souls who loved music and art, bringing joy and beauty into the rough frontier life. Thomas turned out to be a natural horseman, with an almost magical ability to work with even the most difficult animals. And in 1895, Grace gave birth to their youngest child, a daughter named Caroline, who was spoiled and adored by her entire family. Throughout it all, Grace and Violet remained each other's greatest support and truest companion. They had learned to communicate in the wordless way of long married couples, understanding each other's moods and needs with just a glance. They still made time for each other, still had their evening conversations, still found moments to steal kisses when the children were not watching. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Lordsburg held a celebration in the town square. Grace and Violet attended with their children, now ranging from 17-year-old Daniel to 5-year-old Caroline. As fireworks lit up the desert sky, Violet pulled Grace close, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched the display. 18 years, he murmured in her ear. 18 years since a well-meaning preacher with terrible judgment forced us to marry. 18 years of proving yourself to me, Grace said with a laugh. Though honestly, Violet, I think you proved yourself adequately within the first year. You have just been showing off since then. I will never stop trying to be worthy of you, Violet said seriously. Not if we have 18 more years or 50 more years or 100. You deserve to be cherished every single day, and I intend to make sure you are. Grace turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face. There was silver in his dark hair now, and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to her, he was still the handsome cowboy who had saved her from bandits all those years ago. "And you deserve to be loved completely," she said. "Which is exactly what I do. I love you, Violet Young, with my whole heart." They kissed as fireworks continued to explode overhead, their children groaning good-naturedly at their parents' public display of affection, but Grace and Violet did not care. They had earned this love, had fought for it and nurtured it, and watched it grow from the smallest seed of possibility into something strong and enduring. As the years rolled on into the early decades of the 20th century, Grace and Violet watched their children grow into adults and start families of their own. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread and took over much of the day-to-day operations of the young ranch. Abigail married a doctor who had come to the territory from the east, and together they worked to bring modern medicine to the area. The twins both married brothers from a musical family and started a small theater in Lordsburg that brought culture and entertainment to the region. Thomas became a horse breeder of some renown, and Caroline married a teacher and continued her mother's legacy of education. Grace and Violet became grandparents many times over, their home always filled with the laughter of children and grandchildren coming to visit. They aged gracefully together, moving a bit slower but still active and engaged with life. Violet still rode out to check the fences most mornings, though now he took a grandson or granddaughter with him more often than not. Grace still taught occasionally, working with struggling students who needed extra help. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1912, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and what felt like half the population of Lordsburg. The party was held at the ranch, with tables laden with food, music, and dancing, and speeches celebrating the couple who had become pillars of the community. When someone asked Grace what the secret was to their long and happy marriage, she did not hesitate with her answer. "We chose each other," she said simply. "Not in the beginning, perhaps. That choice was made for us by a preacher who thought he was doing the right thing. But every day after that, we chose each other again. We chose patience over anger. We chose understanding over judgment. We chose love over resentment. And those choices, made daily for 30 years, built something stronger than any forced marriage ever could have been on its own." Violet, standing beside her with his arm around her waist, nodded in agreement. "Grace gave me the gift of a year to prove myself," he added. "But really, she gave me the gift of her willingness to see me, to really look at who I was rather than just seeing the situation we were trapped in. She gave me a chance, and I spent every day trying to be worthy of that chance. I am still trying, and I will keep trying for as long as I have breath in my body." The crowd applauded, and then the music started up again and people returned to dancing and celebrating. But Grace and Violet remained where they were for a moment, just looking at each other, seeing not just the aged faces before them, but also the younger versions they had been. The scared strangers forced to marry, the slowly warming acquaintances, the tentative friends, the passionate lovers, the devoted partners. "No regrets?" Violet asked softly, a question he had asked her many times over the years. "No regrets," Grace confirmed, just as she always did. "Only gratitude for every moment we have shared." They danced together then, moving slowly to the music, Grace's head resting on Violet's chest, his arms strong and steady around her. Around them, their children and grandchildren danced as well, a testament to the life they had built, the love they had nurtured. As the sun set over the ranch that had been their home for 30 years, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red and purple, Grace thought about that terrified young woman who had stood in a church with a stranger beside her, feeling like her life was ending. If she could go back and tell that young woman what lay ahead, all the joy and love and fulfillment that would come from this forced marriage, would she believe it? Probably not. She had been too hurt, too angry, too determined to resist, but that was all right. That young woman had needed time to learn what Grace knew now, that love was not always about grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes love was quiet and steady, built day by day through small acts of kindness and devotion. Sometimes love came from the most unexpected places, forced into existence by circumstance, but becoming real through choice and effort, and the determination to make something beautiful out of something difficult. Grace Young, who had been Grace Elliott that day in the church 30 years ago, knew now what she had not known then. She knew that she was loved deeply and truly by a man who had proven himself worthy 1,000 times over. She knew that she had found her place in the world, her purpose, her home. And she knew that even if she could go back and change that day, even if she could erase Preacher Blackwell's misguided intervention and choose a different path, she would not. Because this path, as unexpected and challenging as it had been at the start, had led her to everything that mattered. The music played on, the stars came out, and Grace and Violet danced in the twilight of their ranch, surrounded by the evidence of their love, grateful for every moment of the life they had built together. And when they finally went inside to their bedroom, still arm in arm after all these years, they lay down together in the bed they had shared for 3 decades and fell asleep as they did every night, wrapped in each other's arms, at peace with their past and content with their present. Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. In 1918, the Spanish flu swept through the territory, and the Young family, like so many others, faced tragedy when it claimed the life of Sarah, one of the twins. The family mourned together, supporting each other through the grief, and Grace found solace in Violet's steady presence, just as she always had in difficult times. But there were joys too. More great-grandchildren arrived, filling the world with new life and new possibilities. The ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's management, and the Young name became synonymous with quality cattle and fair dealing throughout New Mexico, which had achieved statehood in 1912. Grace and Violet grew old together with a grace that came from deep contentment. They moved slower, their joints aching with age, but they still took their evening walks around the property when weather permitted, still sat together reading, still found reasons to laugh every day. In the spring of 1925, as they approached their 43rd wedding anniversary, Violet fell ill with pneumonia. Grace nursed him devotedly, refusing to leave his bedside despite her own advanced age. Their children took turns keeping vigil as well, understanding that their father's time might be short. One evening, when it was just the two of them alone in their bedroom, Violet reached for Grace's hand. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice weak but determined. "These 43 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. Every day, even the hard ones, even the days when we disagreed or struggled, has been precious to me because I lived it with you." Grace felt tears streaming down her face. "Please do not talk as if you are saying goodbye. I need you to fight this, Violet. I need you to stay with me." "I am fighting, my love," Violet assured her. "But if my time comes, I want you to know that I have no regrets. I proved myself to you in that first year, and you gave me your heart, and together we built something that will outlast us both. Look at our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. Look at this ranch, at the community we helped build. That is our legacy, Grace." and it is more than I ever dreamed possible when I was a lonely cowboy working this land by myself." "You made it possible," Grace said. "You took a terrible situation and turned it into something beautiful. You gave me a love I never knew existed. You have been my partner, my best friend, my love for over 4 decades, and I am not ready to lose you." "You will never lose me," Violet said, touching her face gently. "I will be in every sunset you watch from our porch. I will be in the sound of the wind through the grass. I will be in the faces of our children and grandchildren. And I will be in your heart, Grace, always. Just as you have been in mine since the day I pulled you up onto my horse and felt your arms around me." Grace climbed carefully into the bed beside him, something she had done every night of their marriage, and laid her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Violet Young. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Grace Young," Violet replied. "Thank you for giving me that year. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for this beautiful life." They lay together in the gathering darkness, Grace listening to the steady beating of Violet's heart, memorizing the rhythm of it, trying to hold onto every precious second. She thought about that day in the church, about the gunshot that had changed everything, about the year Violet had asked for to prove himself, about all the days and years that had followed. She thought about their children being born, about building this life together piece by piece, about growing old side by side. But then, as dawn broke the next morning, Violet's breathing grew stronger rather than weaker. His fever broke, and color returned to his face. Over the next week, he slowly recovered, fighting off the pneumonia with the same stubborn determination he had shown in everything he did. The doctor declared it a miracle, but Grace knew better. Violet was not ready to leave her yet, and she was not ready to let him go. They were given more years together, precious bonus time that they treasured all the more for knowing how close they had come to losing it. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1932, a golden milestone that few couples reached. The celebration was smaller than their 30th anniversary had been, age and distance making travel difficult for some family members, but it was no less joyful. Standing together in the same church where they had been forced to marry 50 years before, now with a different preacher leading the congregation, Grace and Violet renewed their vows. This time the words were their own choice, spoken freely and with deep meaning. "I, Violet Young, choose you, Grace, as my wife," Violet said, his voice strong despite his 80 years. "I chose you 50 years ago when I asked for a year to prove myself. I chose you every day after that, and I choose you now, committing to love you for whatever time we have left together." "I, Grace Young, choose you, Violet, as my husband," Grace replied, her own voice clear and certain. "I chose you when I let down my walls and allowed myself to love you. I chose you with every child we raised, every challenge we faced, every joy we celebrated, and I choose you now and always." There was not a dry eye in the church as they kissed, sealing their renewed vows. Two elderly people still deeply in love after 5 decades of marriage. It was a testament to what was possible when two people committed to each other fully, when they chose love over resentment, patience over anger, hope over despair. Grace and Violet lived several more years together, eventually both needing help with daily tasks, but still insisting on their independence as much as possible. They remained in the ranch house, cared for by their family, still finding joy in each other's company, even when words became difficult and movement slow. One peaceful autumn evening in 1936, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, something they had done thousands of times over their 54 years of marriage. Grace leaned against Violet's shoulder, his arm around her, and they watched the sky paint itself in brilliant colors. "It has been a good life," Grace said softly. "The best life," Violet agreed. "Thank you for sharing it with me." "Thank you for being patient with me," Grace replied, "for giving me time to see what was right in front of me all along." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. And there, surrounded by the land they had worked together for over half a century, in the peace of a quiet evening, first Violet and then Grace, within hours of each other, passed gently from this life into whatever came next, their hands still linked together, their love enduring beyond the boundaries of mortal existence. Their children found them the next morning, still sitting together on the porch, looking peaceful and content, and though there were tears at the loss, there was also a recognition that this was as it should be. Grace and Violet had lived together, loved together, and ultimately left this world together, their lives so intertwined that one could not exist without the other. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large cottonwood tree that Violet had planted the year Daniel was born. Their joint headstone bore a simple inscription: Violet and Grace Young, married by fate, united by choice, together forever. The ranch passed to Daniel and his children, continuing to operate successfully for many generations. The town of Lordsburg grew and changed, but the Young family remained a fixture, known for their integrity, their generosity, and the love story of their founders that was told and retold over the years. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the New Mexico desert in spectacular colors, people claimed they could see two figures on the porch of the old ranch house, sitting close together, watching the sky. Perhaps it was just shadows or tricks of the light. Or perhaps it was Grace and Violet, still choosing each other, still sharing the peaceful joy of each other's company, proving that some loves were strong enough to transcend even death. Their story became legend in Lordsburg and the surrounding area. The tale of a preacher who forced a marriage at gunpoint, and how that unlikely beginning led to one of the greatest love stories the territory had ever known. It was told to young couples facing difficulties, offered as proof that love could grow from the most unpromising circumstances. It was shared at weddings, a reminder that marriage required choice and effort every single day. It was whispered to discouraged hearts, evidence that patience and devotion could overcome any obstacle. And somewhere in the peaceful fields of eternity, Grace and Violet Young continued their conversation, still fascinated by each other after all this time, still grateful for every moment they had shared, still proof that when two people choose love, choose each other, choose patience and understanding and commitment day after day, they can build something that lasts not just a lifetime but forever. Their love had started with a gunshot in a small adobe church, with anger and resentment and fear. But it had grown into something beautiful and enduring through Violet's patient devotion, through Grace's willingness to see beyond her hurt, through their mutual commitment to making their forced marriage into a real and lasting partnership. They had taken the worst possible beginning and transformed it into the best possible life, proving that love was not about perfect circumstances, but about perfect commitment. And that commitment, that choice they made every day to honor their vows and cherish each other, became the foundation on which their entire family was built. Their children learned from their example how to love well, how to weather storms together, how to choose partnership over independence when it mattered. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the legacy of devotion and respect that Grace and Violet had demonstrated throughout their long marriage. The Young ranch became more than just a successful operation. It became a symbol of what was possible when people approached life with integrity and love. It became a place where troubled couples could come and hear the story of Grace and Violet and find hope for their own struggling marriages. It became a reminder that the quality of a relationship was not determined by how it started, but by the daily choices made to nurture and sustain it. As the decades passed and the 20th century progressed, the world changed dramatically around Lordsburg. Cars replaced horses, electricity came to the rural areas, modern conveniences transformed daily life. But the story of Grace and Violet Young remained constant, a touchstone of enduring values in a rapidly changing world. It reminded people that some things, the most important things, remained the same across generations. The need for love, the importance of commitment, the power of choosing each other day after day. And so the legacy of that forced marriage, that year of proving, that lifetime of loving, continued to ripple outward, touching lives and inspiring hearts long after Grace and Violet had left this earthly plane. Their story became part of the fabric of Lordsburg, part of its identity, a testament to the fact that even in the rough and sometimes violent world of the Old West, love could flourish and endure. The young ranch hands who worked the young property in later generations would pause sometimes at sunset and look at the hill where Grace and Violet were buried, and they would think about the love story they represented. And perhaps they would hold their own sweethearts a little closer, appreciate their own partners a little more, try a little harder to be patient and kind and devoted. Because if Grace and Violet could build such a powerful love from such an unpromising beginning, then surely any relationship that started with actual affection and choice had even greater potential. The cottonwood tree that Violet had planted grew tall and strong over the years, its branches spreading wide to provide shade over the graves of the couple who lay beneath it. In spring it would burst into green, in summer it would rustle with life, in fall its leaves would turn golden and beautiful, and in winter its bare branches would reach toward the sky like prayers. Through all seasons, through all weather, it stood as a silent guardian over the resting place of two people who had proven that love was the most powerful force in the world, stronger than circumstance, more enduring than time, capable of transforming even the most unlikely situation into something beautiful. And if you listened carefully on those quiet desert evenings, when the wind moved through the cottonwood's branches and the sun painted the sky in colors beyond description, you might almost hear it. The sound of two voices, still talking, still sharing thoughts and dreams, still deeply engaged with each other after all this time. Grace and Violet Young, forever united, forever choosing each other, forever proving that real love never dies but only grows stronger and deeper with every passing moment, every shared experience, every choice to honor the commitment they had made. Their story was complete, their lives fully lived, their love perfectly realized. From that chaotic day in the church, when a preacher's rifle forced them into matrimony, through the year when Violet proved himself worthy, through all the decades that followed filled with children and challenges and joys, they had written a love story for the ages. And their descendants, carrying forward the values Grace and Violet had embodied, ensured that their legacy would continue inspiring generations yet to come. A reminder that true love, built on respect and patience and daily choice, could overcome any obstacle and last not just until death but beyond it, into eternity itself.